Okay. Hello. Welcome to Story Hour. I'm Kathy Ramsperger, and I'm a journalist, humanitarian, and the award-winning author of two novels, Now the Shores of Our Souls and A Thousand Flying Things. I'm also a coach who founded Ground One and created Step Into Your Story. And I'm here to connect people who love books, and you're in for a treat today. Um, I concentrate on transformational stories of international interest on my podcast, plus multicultural relations and social justice. All the books that I feature focus on the connections and often the disconnections between human beings. And like I said, we have a wonderful treat, DeMisty D. Bellinger. Thanks for being with us, DeMisty.
Thank you for having me. This is exciting.
It is exciting. You've written a beautiful book and you have so much knowledge, and I can
Thank you.
tell. DeMisty, her debut novel is New to Liberty. She's also written two volumes of poetry, and you can hear that in her novels. She has poetic voice, lyrical, and incisive. And her volumes of poetry are Peculiar Heritage and Rubbing Elbows, as well as appearing in anthologies. This might be her first novel, but it's not going to be her last by a long shot. And I mentioned she's a professor. She's also a poetry editor at Malarkey Books, an alumni reader at Prairie Schooner, and she teaches at Fitchburg, State University in Massachusetts. She has a BA in English from University of Wisconsin-Platteville, an MFA from Southampton College. I love their literary
Yeah.
and a PhD from University of Nebraska. She's an alum of Breadloaf and Marge Percy's intensive writing workshop. Big credits there. And she obviously lives in Massachusetts with her husband and twin daughters. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the book now and hold it as I read. It's such a cool cover. Three women, decades apart from each other, fight for love and agency, and that agency is incredibly important. And I would add freedom in a rural Kansas community seemingly frozen in time. A novel told in three parts and three eras, New to Liberty showcases the growth and strength of these three unforgettable women as they evolve in a society that refuses to. And sometimes we're still there. In lustrous prose, DeMisty Bellinger brings the quiet but treacherous landscape to life, offering a vivid snapshot of mid-century America and keeping readers guessing, boy, did you, until the end as to how these three women are connected. So the three eras are told in reverse, 1966, and the characters are called Cicely and Ezzie, and Ezzie's mom, who are driving cross country, and they stop to meet his mom in Liberty, Kansas. 1947, Nellie's family relocates to Liberty from Milwaukee, two very different places, and during the summer before her senior year, begins an interracial relationship with a white man called Lucky. They can only meet in secret, or as Lucky is in a wheelchair, Nella sometimes pretends to be his nurse. And then, 1933, Greta finds love with a woman from the neighboring farm during the height of the Dust Bowl and brutal jackrabbit roundups. Just brutal, brutal, brutal all around. Surrounded by violence and starvation, their clandestine encounters are unsustainable, and yet the implications, and I'll add reverberations, of their relationship will find a way to endure for generations. Such a great book, and I'm not the only one that thinks so. And we're just about to go to Q&A, but I want to read a couple of endorsements. Because this one, I know why I love this novel, because I love Steinbeck and I love Jane Smiley. Bellinger joins the ranks of epic, intimate family stories like Steinbeck's East of Eden for its tale of truth and justice, and Jane Smiley's A Thousand Acres for humanity's capacity for good and evil. New to Liberty is a contemporary voice for our historical heartland, says Melissa Scholes Young, author of The Hive. And John Copenhaver says, he's the author of The Savage Kind. Moving back from the summers of 1966, 1947, and 1933, New to Liberty gorgeously traces the long shadow of trauma lingering over the American Midwest, from the scourge of the Dust Bowl to racism and violence toward women to the fleeting beauty of forbidden love. With vibrant and restrained prose, Bellinger has achieved the seemingly impossible. I agree. I get chills every time. I think you did this in 200 pages. Written an American epic in under 200 pages. So there it is. Any comments before we just launch into questions, DeMisty?
I think my only comment so far is that every time I hear someone talk about the book, it seems like they're talking about someone else, some other person's book. And the whole experience has been unreal and a dream come true. So, and I'm very grateful to be here today. Thank you.
Well, congratulations, and get used to it. But I totally, as an author myself, totally get it. I got a really wonderful Midwest Review of Books review last week, and it doesn't seem real because you work so long and then all of a sudden. So, but this is just amazing, and I found this book in a first novel contest at the Writer Center where I teach, and I asked if I could interview DeMisty, and they said yes after you rate it, and I did that really early, and so here we are today. It's just, it really is a contemporary Steinbeck or Smiley, and there's probably an African American book that is very, I mean, there's so many that I was trying to find the right author, but you just put so much in there, so much in so little space. So I have to ask, what inspired this novel to begin with, and how did you find your characters? Because they're all over the place in terms of, yeah.
Okay, so this book initially started in grad school with a short story. My comprehensive exams was, my focus for that was working class fiction. So a lot of the work in working class fiction, of course, took place during the Dust Bowl. I've read Steinbeck before, but of course I reread Grapes of Wrath while working on his exams, and I don't know if I read 1,000 Acres then or before or later, and also read Timothy Egan's The Worst Hard Times, and in that book I learned about the jackrabbit roundups, how people killed jackrabbits, usually by hand, because they were a plague on the land during the Dust Bowl. And so I wondered, okay, there are people who lived through that and they grew up, and what do those people look like in their adulthood? How does that experience of living through the Dust Bowl form them and inform their lives? So that's where Ezzy came about, and Cecily came about, because I always wondered about May-December relationships, how they work, and how long they last, if they do last. And it all just kind of picked up from there. And I started when I thought Ezzy would be an adult, like well into his adulthood. And I moved backwards from that point. And yeah, Nellie, first, like I said, it was a short story, and there was too much that I wanted to do in that short story. So it did expand into the novel, and I brought in Nellie and Lucky, and then later Greta, who is, I don't know, is my favorite character. So yeah.
I wanted to say, oh, so and so was my favorite, but I don't think I have a favorite. They're all really well developed and in very little space. So thank you for that. It's really cool knowing how it all began. Um, so you're writing forward. You've written 1966, or the first draft of it at least. And what were your goals as you wrote forward? How did you figure out 1940? I know why you figured out, well, I think I know, 1933.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but 1947, I'm wondering why that was. It halfway? Was
Mm. Um, well, it wasn't, it's kind of halfway. And I wanted a character that kind of met between the Dust Bowl and the 66. And there was a draft where I went further into the future, but that draft didn't make it for various reasons. And as far as the order, the chronological order of the book, reverse chronological, um, that came after many drafts. And I thought that that way works best, I believe, for the story I wanted to tell. I did have a draft where the stories connected, converged in real time. And I didn't like that because it felt too neat, and I didn't want it to be a neat piece. I wanted it to be as messy as the landscape is, or as purposeful as the story is. So I think that works better to have it separated that way. Did I answer your question? I feel like
You
I got
totally
lost.
did. You
Okay.
totally did. And you intrigued me to want to ask more, but I want to make sure I get these asked. And then if we have time at the end, I'll follow up. You started it.
Mhm.
So why Kansas and not Nebraska? And I'll give you a guess because I'm a reader, right? So I'm thinking it's almost like you're turning that whole Dorothy Gale uh, thing on its head.
Mhm.
I don't
Yeah.
know. I mean, that was Kansas, right? Uh,
I think that's part of it. I think it's like the mystery of Kansas. I never lived in Kansas, but I traveled to Kansas quite often. In fact, that was just there last weekend. Um, but it comes down to the Black Sunday, when there was a really bad dust storm in Kansas and in parts of the Great Plains that eventually reverberated to DC, like in the air, sort of like what it happened this
kind of
summer
like the
with.
wildfires in Canada, right?
Right, exactly. And when that happened, um, politicians started paying attention. It took that catalyst. Also, I when I researched more of the Jackrabbit roundups, a lot of them took place in Kansas, um, near Liberal, Kansas, and other places. So it's not actually Liberty, Kansas, but it's Liberal, Kansas. And so I wanted to ground that story there in that state. Plus, there of course, Wizard of Oz is written in Kansas, but there are not a lot of, as far as I knew at the time, there was not a lot of literature from that area of the
Well, I
country.
learned so much from this book. I had never heard of the Jackrabbit. I'd heard of it. I won't say I hadn't heard of it, but I didn't understand it.
Hmm.
It is there is so much brutality and man against animal and man against neighbor, and
Mhm.
I use the word man for a reason.
Yeah.
And the women were almost left to pick up the pieces, and
Mm.
included the jackrabbits.
Mhm.
It got to me, it really did. And I've covered wars. I'm
Mm.
a journalist, and this just real that was such a wonderful symbol. Um, and that's all I'll say. I just so I'm assuming that you did. There's one other thing I want to say. My nephew interned in Kansas, and
Mm.
I've never been to Kansas. And he told me that you just have no idea, because he'd never seen a state where he could get on his bike and
Mhm.
ride and not hit a single hill, not a single hill, just for miles
Yeah,
and miles and miles.
yeah.
So I was picturing all that,
Mhm.
as I was reading too, so it makes sense that it would have gotten the worst of it because it's
Yes, yeah.
so flat. Um, okay, but I'm assuming that you did your due diligence in terms of research on dust storms and jackrabbits and the such. How long did the research take versus the writing? Or
Um,
was it together?
well, no, it wasn't together. The research took about a year, just looking into the history, and it involved um, reading books, of course, but also visiting the web and watching documentaries. There's some great documentaries on the Dust Bowl, of course, especially one done by PBS. I can't remember the name of it, but a lot of that was very helpful. So was Kansas Historical Society, just their website and the pictures they have of the Dust Bowl, of the roundups, and just everything. And yes, lots of Kansas is flat. Lots of the Great Plains are flat, but there are hilly areas. It depends on what part you are in, but there are, like I said, it was just there this weekend coming from Massachusetts, which is I live in a very hilly town, so going to Kansas again in that part of the country and just seeing the sky, having it take my breath away all over again because when I first moved there from Wisconsin to the Great Plains, I really understood what that term, the big sky country, is, and because it is nothing breaking your view. And when storms come in, it's one of the most awesome experiences I've ever had when I lived there in the Great Plains. Um,
You make me
but
want.
yeah, about a year of research and then back and forth, and some of my sources for actual things. My parents were antique dealers, and my father was always kind of into cars with his brother, so I will call him and ask him questions. And call
Mm.
my parents and ask about furniture and whatnot. So yeah,
So I'm seeing little bits and pieces from your own life in there too.
yeah.
Yeah, that's that's really wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. So it's not just about Kansas and it's not just about the Dust Bowl. I am absolutely in awe of your being able to deal with prejudice and bigotry and gender and identity issues in such a sensitive and sometimes violent and sometimes subtle way in this little space. And you mentioned that um, you took it forward into I don't know what year and decided not to. And
Mhm.
you don't have to tell us why, but I'm wondering, I'm thinking I know why 1966 is where it began or ended or time is all relative. But will you talk a little bit about that, about how you how you decided which era to put what in and
Mm.
all that. I don't want to give anything away either.
Okay.
So,
So I think a part of it is like the 60s beyond the civil rights movement, which is a really big thing, of course, at the time. But so was we're getting into more freedom as far as love or pairing up, and also autonomy of women, but not so much so. Like we were not, I don't think, well, we still aren't equal, but women were still really second class citizens during the 60s. And I think Cicely is finding that out
mm,
as she travels with Ezzy. Um, and so I picked that period for that. And of course, since Ezzy was a child in a Dust Bowl, also to bring him forward into time there. But I kind of felt comfortable in the 60s too, although I'm a lot younger than that, just because I could call my parents and ask them questions along those lines.
my son is not quite 30, and I
Yeah.
always say, you must have had another life in Vietnam or something because Like, yeah, that's where you last got killed, right?
Yeah,
Because he loves everything 1970s. And I'm like,
yeah,
why? Interesting. It's really interesting.
yeah, yeah,
Um, and I agree that it's wonderful to have people we can ask if we're accurate or not. Yeah.
that's true. Yeah.
Um, well, I I was 21 in 1980, and you got it right. I mean, I know it was
Yeah.
1966, but even
Yeah.
in 1980, I mean, we had this decade of marches, right? I mean,
Right,
the other
right.
thing for justice, and it seemed like it was still the same. Like, we were allowed to come into certain places, but we weren't allowed to be ourselves.
Right.
I I really enjoyed that, and I enjoyed the juxtaposition, and was shocked at the end by it. Uh, of sorry, I've got to look at her name. It's
Margit, is it?
Margit. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, I loved. You just have to read it. Um, so uh, really great job on that. As far as I know, I was alive in 1966, but I wasn't involved yet. So I wanted to compliment you on your writing about race and gender so well, and I do believe that it's because you inhabit your characters. You're really seeing the world through their eyes. And my first book had a male era Muslim point of view, and I didn't
Mhm.
get much flack about it, but I was basically told not to have that point of view in the second one. And now the
Mhm.
readers are saying, please, we want it back. We want to know what he thinks. So I'd love to have a little chat about that. And what are your thoughts as an African American writer and professor, um, who's lived all across the country? Uh, what are your thoughts on point of view and race in writing? I'd love to for our audience
Yeah.
to hear that.
Sometimes I feel, because not all of my characters in my short stories and other things I've written have a race. And
Mm,
sometimes they do. Sometimes they're very deliberately white or black. Or I do have a short story where one of the characters is Muslim. Um, I don't think I say if he's Arabic or not, but he's definitely Muslim.
mhm,
And sometimes I feel, I don't know if it's the climate or what, or even well, like you said, I'm a poet too, and one of the projects I'm working on is an ekphrasis project where I'm looking at artwork of old masters, so quote unquote old masters,
mhm,
um, with people of color in their
mhm.
artwork. And the
Oh,
question, like if I look at somebody like Gauguin, those women were Tahitian.
yeah,
They were not African American. So am I appropriating them by trying to give them voice?
yeah.
Even if it's questioning Gauguin as looking at them as the other.
Mhm.
So it's a really delicate
It is.
line to walk down. I think the goal with all with this lately is to make sure people who are marginalized or who are disadvantaged do have a place in the discipline of writing, that they can tell their stories.
I
And when
like
we have characters, because we don't want characters that are necessary, we don't want a book that's populated with everyone who looks like us, right? Because the real world is not that way. But when we have characters who are not of us, we have to learn the difference between exchange and appropriation. Are we making them something that we believe that person is? Are we giving them real voices? Are we making them caricatures, or are they characters? Are we respecting them? I feel kind of two-sided about doing sensitivity readings, anything along those lines. But I think the most important thing is to be fair to our characters and be fair to the story and not reduce anybody to a stereotype or a tool for a plot, if that makes sense. I hope that we're moving away from things like the magical Negro or the mystical Asian idea or anything like that, or silent Indian. I hope that we're moving away from those and making real characters out of those people. And you know, I just heard recently that 80% of the books, I don't quote me exactly, although I'm saying it out loud, published last year were by white men. Of course, white men should have, write your books, publish your books, but we need to have more books written by people of color, by women of all backgrounds, by queer people, by disabled writers, to bring in those voices more. It's a difficult subject to talk about, I think.
It is, and I thank you for doing it. I thank you so much for doing it, because I think we're all grappling with it right now, and some people might not be, but I certainly do, because it's one reason I have my podcast, is to have equal representation of all the
Mhm,
different authors that are available. So
mhm,
I lived in around the world for a while, and I would walk into a bookstore in any country, any country. I didn't go to Australia, so I'm not going to say anything. I'm sure it's got it too, but
mhm,
I'm talking about Europe, Asia, Africa, and
mhm,
the Middle East. And not only would they have every single not every single one, but a
mhm,
diversity of nationalities and cultures and races represented in their
mhm.
section, but they would have so many in English. And
Right.
I came back thinking, I just want to open that kind of bookstore. And
Mhm.
then I had two children, and it didn't happen yet. Um,
Yeah.
but it, I don't understand. I think it's finally happening, but it's like
Yeah.
creeping in. Maybe at the university bookstores now. I don't know.
Yeah.
No,
It depends on the university. It really does.
that makes me so sad. Well, thank you for your viewpoint, because I realize that it's a controversial subject right now, and yet I think that there are those of us, including me, that are trying to get it right. And
Mhm.
I know I try to get more books published by a
Yeah.
diverse array of people. Um, and in this first novel contest, it's just been wonderful, because there is such diversity. So we've covered a lot. I totally identified with parts of each of your female characters. Um, and I was wondering a little bit if they would all be female today. Um,
Mhm.
I totally uh I just understood them, and I understood their motivations. And I'm assuming people tell you that you have a gift for empathy and walking in other people's shoes. Do you hear that, or is it
I don't, I don't know if I have or not. I don't know.
okay? I think you do, but I only know your writing so far, and the little bit of time we've spent here. But
Thank
um,
you.
I was so impressed um, by the white Midwest Western, and I assume they're Midwestern in Kansas,
Yeah.
yes, women that you portrayed, and the diversity of strength, and the just the survival ability and what they did. What it rivals anything that these movies where there's an accident and all the heroes come. It
Mm,
it was a quiet strength, and I wanted to mention that. I
mm,
also we talked. You said at the beginning, uh, liberal Kansas, and you didn't change it, but you made the title New to Liberty. And
mhm.
I want to talk a little bit about whether you feel that at the end anybody was free yet, or were they still dealing with?
I think that they have come to define themselves more than be defined by others, and understand the way that they can fit in their worlds. I really do. Um, and I hoped, well, I hope that it ended on a hopeful note for each of the women, um, because I did want them to, we all experience our little traumas or our big traumas, or and hopefully we come out of it stronger and more certain of ourselves. And I did want to bring that across for each of the women. Yeah.
You
Yeah.
did. Um, they, especially 1933, I took in a breath at the end, which
Mhm.
always just means that um, freedom to me, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And hope. Um, and even if it only lasted in that moment, it
Right.
was enough. And I think that's how life is. We just
Hmm.
have to be grateful for the moments of joy and fulfillment and ecstasy, even, right?
Hmm.
Because life life isn't always easy.
No.
um, so we've gone fast and covered a lot of ground. I'm wondering, because I always ask authors this if there's time,
Hmm.
if there was a single message you'd like to get across to readers,
Hmm.
would it be about this novel? And are they understanding that message? Is there something that you feel like might be hidden in the writing?
I think that the message is to persevere and to, it sounds really corny, but really believe in yourself and listen to yourself. Listen to what you want, um, but also experience life. And I think that's something else that these three women have done. And I can't even say four women because I would include Ezzy's mother in that. Experience life and find out what you are capable of, and find out what the world is capable of. I think all of these women do that. You mentioned the strong Midwestern white women. When I lived in Nebraska and even in Wisconsin, I will come across like these women who are German descended or Polish descended, Eastern European descended, farm mothers, farm women, always very strong and kind and serious. And and when you get to a certain age, they get to a certain age, you just feel like they feel confident about themselves. They exude this confidence. And I try to mimic that, and characters like Greta and Margit. Also, my great aunts were like that, especially my great aunt Betsy, my grandmother's sister. Who, they're not white women, they're Black women, but they were raised in a rural community in a different part of the country in Tennessee. And they also very strong, powerful women, very smart and caring. And my grandmother, I would include in that, of course. So I think um, a little bit of them are in those characters too. I, of course, this is not autobiographical by any means, but I think every writer is going to bring some of themselves into whatever work they produce, they like it or not. I think however hard we try, we're going to be there some in some pieces, or the people that we love or people that we don't love so much are going to make it into. So
I love that you have a diversity of strong women in the book to show the different ways they're strong. Um, and I hear you about um, both white and Black women. They're all strong and different. They have different personalities, but they're so strong. I want to look and see. So I love the dedication that it is to your husband and best friend. And I totally agree. My husband used to stand outside with the kids going, Mommy's working, and
yeah,
son went to
good.
kindergarten and had that star of the day one day. They said, what does your mom do for fun? And he said, she plays computer games. He thought I was shutting this door for an hour to go play my Nintendo, and
Oh,
yeah,
that's hilarious.
it is. So, um, I've been thinking this whole time about who my favorite character is. I really resonated with Nella. I
Yeah.
was
Okay.
I think it was because of the things that happened to her,
Mm-hmm.
and I just growing up in a time where there was so much segregation and separation between everything, like religion and
Mm-hmm.
politics um and race and did I say gender? I mean, I could go on and on and on. And now in ways it's starting to open up and it's more fluid and people can do things they couldn't do back in the 40s and even the 60s. But
Mm-hmm.
my fear is that it might be closing back up again because of the finger
Mm-hmm.
point. And I think that's why I loved her so much, because she didn't let she didn't let it stop her. She
Mm-hmm.
just and she carried him with her. So I'm not going to keep going on that one either because I'll
Yeah.
give it away. But I just wanted to know that in case this we I think we will talk again because I know there'll be more books.
I
Um,
hope so.
I hear you. I hear you on that one too. So it's not easy to publish a book these days, guys. You can be stellar, and if your book is a little different, it's even tougher.
Mm-hmm.
So, what's next for you and your writing, DeMisty, or your life?
Oh, okay. So the next book is behind me. That's like all my characters.
That's really
um,
cool.
yeah, I keep saying that this book is bigger than me. It really is. Um, so I've been working on kind of a saga, the story of this woman who trauma happens to her at the beginning, police violence, and she has to go through like this journey to figure out the worth of staying here as an African American person in this climate. And this one is not exactly historical, but I do go back in time. It's kind of a time travel type thing.
Ooh,
Yeah, I know. There's a lot going on. Again, it's women centered. Most of the characters in this one are African American, and some African too. And it was a lot of fun to write. I started writing it a couple years ago when I was in Iceland, out of all places. And that's why I call it like a saga, because I was very inspired by the sagas while I was there in Iceland. And I finished the first draft and I sent it to my agent. I was really, really worrying. And she got back to me. She responded positively for the most part. So when I find time, I'm going to be revising that one. I'm also collating a lot of my short stories and trying to get a collection together. So we'll see what happens with that. And yeah, writing poetry still here and there. Most of the time during this time of year, though, the teaching year, most of my writing happens in a classroom when I give my students time to write. Because when I get home for the day, I'm so tired. And, it's family time, and there's hardly any time to write. When I was younger, I used to be able to stay up till 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, and not so much anymore. Those days are gone.
I know, I know. So, how do your kids feel? Is it just what you do, or are they
So
excited?
my kids are 14 now, so they lived through this like, well, all their life, of
Mhm.
course, writing with them. Um, I I don't think they dig the stuff that I write. They're into fantasy and mysteries, and they really love manga, which is the Japanese
Yeah, my
kind of
daughter.
graphic novel. Yeah. Yeah, but they also have started writing. One publishes regularly a comic on Webtoons, and they love really love doing that. And has they have a discipline behind their schedule, their publication schedule, and everything. So yeah,
It's
it's
fantastic. I love the internet for that reason, because people can start earlier and earlier sharing.
yeah, yeah. And she has a following, and she gets a lot of yeah, yeah. She likes it a lot. So
I'm sure. Well, it's all in the family. That's cool. And so I always end with a teabag wisdom and then where people can find you. And this is it's usually true. I'll show you it's real though. Gratitude is not about what is received, it is about how you receive what is there. And I think of all your characters, all the strong ones, including, I'm sorry that I have to keep looking up their
that's
name.
okay. There's a lot of
Um,
names.
Lucky. I should have remembered
Yeah.
that. Um, I just think about how grateful they all are, and they don't necessarily have reason to be very much, and yet that makes them stronger. So so congratulations on such a hopeful book. And
Thank
where can
you.
people find you and your work?
Okay, so I have a website, DeMistyBellinger.com, but you can find my work like if you search for me on the internet, my books are for sale at Barnes and Noble, a couple of them are, and at bookshop.org, Amazon. And of
Oh,
course,
all
always
my
order for your order from your indie if you can. If you have an independent bookstore in your area, not all of us do. Order from your independent. So yeah. Yeah.
um yeah, I always say the same thing, and I think it's important, even if they are not near us, for people to actually be aware that they,
Mhm. Yeah,
that helps us and it helps them to
yeah,
stay in business, because the indies are the ones that take books that are um, out of the box. They
right.
So I have a lot of love for them. So I looked. There are 3 likes, but no questions.
Okay. That's fine.
Um, and Thank you so much to Misty for being with us today. I know people are going to watch it on YouTube later. I'll have that up by Tuesday next week, and I'll share it with you.
Okay.
And everybody else, you can find more about DeMisty, like she said, at DeMistyBellinger.com, and she's at online retailers and some brick and mortar stores. You can find more about me and my work at KatherineBrownRamsperger.com, including some of my stories and essays. And you can join me every third Thursday of each month, right here on my Facebook page, interviewing authors. And we'll be here again live with authors like DeMisty next month. We're featuring Sean Verdoni's Canoodling Out West and talking about themes of mental health and suicide, which are such important themes to be talked about. October is a big mental health month, but we can't talk about it enough. We need to keep more people on this planet. Um, this um, this timing is really right though, and so please join us and post your questions beforehand if you can't. You can find all my interviews archived on YouTube and Facebook, and you know where to find me, KatherineBrownRamsperger.com. uh, Thanking to Misty again, wishing you all a happy autumn, for
Thank you
autumn
for having
here. Thank you. No matter where you are, I wish you joy, peace, and a great book like DeMisty's to read. Pick it up, guys. It's so worth it. Thank you.